Thank you guys. Thanks for allowing me to be here today to talk to you guys for a little bit. I just want to give you kind of just a quick background. The bio that you guys had was a little out of date because it's on me. I procrastinated and didn't get an updated bio to them. And so let me just give you a little bit of the update because the bio that they have doesn't talk about my work at the police department. And I am a staff psychologist at the Houston Police Department. And I basically do kind of 5 main functions at the police department. A lot of times people are curious. They don't realize that HPD has a psychological services division and that they have 8 full-time licensed psychologists who work there. And people are always like, well, what do y'all do? So just really quickly, I'll kind of let you know the first function that we have is we provide mental health services to any employee of HPD. So there's 2 types of employees at HPD. I'm a civilian employee. I work there, but I'm not a police officer. So I'm what's called a civilian. And then you have classified employees, and those are the police officers. So civilian or classified can come and see us. They can get individual, family, their spouses or partners can come and get therapy from us. And any dependent children up to age 26 are able to come and get services there. It's a really great service for them. It starts at the cadet level. Or at higher, it goes all the way through retirement. As long as you retire in good standing with the police department, you can come and see us. I actually have quite a few retired officers who come in and see me and they're like, why didn't I do this years ago? And I'm like, I don't know. Why didn't you? It probably would have been helpful, that sort of thing. So we provide kind of a wide range of mental health services. The services are free for the employee and their families. They don't pay anything for them. The city covers all the cost. And they're unlimited. So it's not like an EAP where you get 6 or so free sessions a year. It's unlimited. So that's our first function. Our second function is if you want to be a police officer in the state of Texas, you have to take a psychological evaluation. And so a lot of police departments that don't have a psych services division, they have to kind of farm those out to people in the city, and hope that they can find enough people to do those. We do them all in-house. We do all of them. And so anybody who wants to be a police officer has to come through psychological services and be evaluated by us. Our third function is we teach. So we teach at the cadet level. I teach 4 different classes at the cadet level. Those cadets get 2 classes on the psychology of policing. I teach a class on bias in policing, and I teach a class on trauma in policing. And so those are the classes that we provide to the cadets, but we also do civilian classes and classified classes. What function am I on? Was that 4? The 5th function that we don't do it very often, but it is available, is we provide something called mutual aid. So if they're, to have a psych services division is a very expensive endeavor. Most smaller police departments do not have psychological services. HPD has the largest psychological services in the state of Texas and probably one of the largest in the nation. We actually have a very unique model. We've been around for 40 years. Amazingly enough, somebody 40 years ago was thinking about the mental health of police officers, but they were, and that's how we got started. But most police departments don't have psychological services. But if they have a critical incident, if they have like an officer involved shooting or something like that, and their officers aren't doing well, they will call us and say, can our officer come and see you through mutual aid? And so we may provide services for that officer, just kind of get them stabilized, find out what they need, help the department be able to, the smaller department be able to figure out what they need to do for that officer. And that's called mutual aid. So those are kind of our 5 functions. I missed one, I think. Yes, I did miss one. We also are on call. So 24/7, a psychologist is on call, okay? So if there is a crisis at 2 a.m., there's been an officer involved shooting, we're on the list, whoever's on call gets called, and you assess the situation, and you may end up driving across Houston in the middle of the night to see an officer, to support an officer. So we do provide on-call services as well. So when I was asked to speak today on a topic for the Hope and Healing Center's fall educational series, it seemed kind of natural to speak on a topic around crises or stress. First of all, after the past 1.5 years, almost 2 years that we've kind of all experienced, it seemed kind of appropriate, right? But it also comes naturally to me as a staff psychologist for the Houston Police Department, because much of what we do is we support our officers during times of crises or critical incidents that they might experience. I just came off of being on call last week. I had the Thanksgiving week, which in and of itself is stressful. when you're on call. I always have to make sure my phone's on. If I'm upstairs and my phone's downstairs, I'm like, oh, I left my phone. I have to run downstairs and get it because it stresses me out. But the main function of being on call is to provide support, to be ready if a crisis should occur. All of us at the police department and the Psych Services Division, we're all trained in CISM, which is a model that you use when you have crises and that sort of thing. So we're all trained in that, and we do use it on a pretty regular basis. Apart from that, though, most of us, I would say probably all of us, have never lived through a pandemic like we've done for the last 2 years, right? Most of us have never experienced, what was it, a 1,000-year flood? Is that what they're calling Harvey? Something like that. Most of us have never lived through that. Well, we did live through that, but most of us had never experienced that prior to that. So we've had kind of in our world, in our community, we've had a lot of crises that have been happening. We've had a lot of things that have really kind of stressed people, that have really stretched people very thin. And so what do we do in those times? How do we protect, our mental health? How do we help ourselves have a little bit different perspective when we're faced with situations that are not normal? They're very abnormal situations. All right, so I do want to let you guys know that in this presentation, I'm going to use the word stress and crisis kind of interchangeably. Crisis is typically the event, right, that you experience, and stress is kind of the reaction that you have to that event. And so I'm going to kind of use those two terms interchangeably. So what do I mean? Oh, I need to change my slide. Okay, hold on. Sorry, technically challenged. There we go. So what do I mean whenever I use the word stress? What is stress? We've all heard that term. Stress is kind of a buzzword, right? We've all used that term. We've all said things such as like, this stresses me out. For us children of the 80s, we might have used the phrase like, I'm stressed to the max, something like that. But what is stress? It's a word this word that we commonly use. Oh, he needs me to, there we go. Is that better? The word that we so commonly use today was actually coined in 1936 by Hans Selye, and he defined stress as a non-specific response of the body to any demand for change. Okay. The NCCIH, which is the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, that's through the NIH, they define stress as a physical and emotional reaction that people experience as they encounter change in their life. Most of us would probably agree that we view stress as negative, that we don't consider stress to be a positive thing in our lives a lot of times, that most people kind of view it as negative. And I find that a lot of times the definition of stress, it's actually not super helpful. Those definitions are kind of vague, like what exactly does that mean? What is a non-specific response? Like, that sort of thing, because stress is very subjective. What stresses one person may not stress another, right? And so, we're trying to put a definition, we're trying to put define something that's very subjective for people. So then the next question is all stress bad for you? And the answer is no, okay? Not all stress is bad. Stress can be good up to a point, right? So if you can see on my little chart here that you can see that as stress increases, right, as pressure and the level of stress increases, your ability to cope and perform actually increases as well up to a certain point, right? You kind of hit the hump and then fatigue sets in and good stress turns into distress and performance declines, as does health. Okay, so when you're in your kind of optimal zone, when stress is good, you're alert, you're decisive, you're creative, you're stimulated, you have high energy, you're focused, your work feels effortless. But after you hit the hump and you start into where it's no longer helpful, you have reduced efficiency and activity, you might have lower self-esteem, you're irritable, you're anxious, you're exhausted, you just feel overloaded. Right? And so stress up to a point can be good. When I was in college, this was going to tie right into what I told y'all on the first slide about my procrastination. I was not great at doing my papers, especially papers. I don't know what it was, but I would wait till the very last minute to write any kind of paper. And then I would have to pull an all-nighter and I'd have to stay up all night and like just pound this paper out. And generally they were good, that sort of thing. but I wasn't great about planning ahead and that sort of thing. I worked really well. It was like I was in the zone and I could just sit down and just do a paper and that sort of thing. That worked really well for that. But what if I did that with everything? What if I had 4 papers due in a week's amount of time and I did that for all 4 of them? By the time I got to the 4th one, I would be way far over on this curve, right? And I would probably be crying as I'm typing the paper or begging my professor for an extension or something along those lines. So optimal performance up to a point, detrimental performance after that, right? The thing we need to understand about stress, and I think probably everybody does understand this, is that stress can lead to growth. You know, if you think about the classic example of a caterpillar in a cocoon, there has to be some stress there. There has to be some pressure for that caterpillar to emerge as a butterfly, right? But if there's too much, it goes all wrong, right? And so, so understanding that not all stress is bad, that some stress can be good, and it is good for growth. We do need it for growth, okay? So what are the types of stress, right? A lot of times people just talk about stress in general, and we've done that. But there are actually different types of stress, and it's important to kind of know what those different types are. The first one that we're going to talk about is called eustress, and eustress is good stress. Okay, it might be the birth of a child, it might be marriage, it might be a promotion at work, but generally this type of stress tends to motivate us. It focuses our energy. It improves performance. Like, it's good stress. It's still stressful, but it's good. However, this type of stress is highly impacted by perception. The person must perceive that the stressor is good, right? For example, there may be a couple, maybe they're expecting their first child, they're very excited. The birth of that child is a welcome event within the whole family. Everyone's very excited. Eustress. Right? Compare that though maybe to a single mom who already has 3 children at home and she's working 60 hours a week and she finds out that she's pregnant again, and now she doesn't know what is she going to do, right? What if the pregnancy doesn't go well and she has to miss work? She can't miss work. She has other kids at home that she has to feed. That is no longer eustress for that individual, right? So it's highly dependent upon perception and what the person perceives as good stress or good or negative events, right? The second type of stress that we're going to talk about is acute stress. And acute stress is a type of stress that tends to come and go relatively quickly. It might be illness, maybe an argument with a spouse, maybe a deadline at work, something like that, but it tends to kind of come and go pretty quickly. It hits, you experience it, but it's fairly short-lived, okay? There is a type, kind of a subtype under acute stress called severe acute stress. And a lot of times that is when you have a circumstance that you've experienced in which you felt like your life was threatened. Okay, and that is severe acute stress. If it's not taken care of, right, if you don't get help with that, it can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, okay? The third type of stress is chronic stress. Chronic stress is stress that feels inescapable. I cannot get out from under this. Things like chronic pain, poverty, maybe a domestic violence situation, maybe for a child who's stuck in an abusive situation. It's stress that doesn't seem to end. It feels like you cannot escape it, okay? If it's not resolved, it can lead obviously to physical and mental health issues, okay? I do feel like COVID for a lot of people has kind of turned into a chronic stress situation. There's a lot of questions of, is it going to end? Or are we ever going to get to go back to normal? Like, what is that going to look like? Are we just going to continually have new variants? You know, those kinds of things. That the experience of COVID for a lot of people has become kind of like this chronic state of, it doesn't appear to be getting better, and I don't know what to do about it. Okay. The fourth type of stress that we're going to talk about is cumulative stress. And I put a little police officer up there because cumulative stress is one of the types of stress that police officers experience on a regular basis. You finish one call, you take care of that, you get in your car, there's another call waiting. I go to that call, I finish that call, I get in my car, there's another call waiting, and it's all day, right? And you never know what kind of call it's going to be. Is this call going to be easily resolved or not easily resolved, right? And so there is a kind of a cumulative effect We might experience it as in like I'm running late for work. I get in my car is not running correctly. Now I'm even more late for work, but I finally get to work and I have stuff that I'm doing at work, and then the school calls and my kid's sick and now I got to go pick up my kid. And that's kind of a cumulative stress, right? It's just one thing after another. They seem to kind of pile up on top of each other. And by the end of the day, you're exhausted and you're trying to figure out what am I going to do and things of that nature. So that would be an example of cumulative stress. And then the last type of stress is emotional stress. And emotional stress is when you experience fear or anxiety, maybe worry, guilt, resentment, anger, any type of emotion, but these get in the way of your daily task or your life. Okay, so these emotions that you're experiencing interfere with relationships. They cause problems at work. Let's say somebody has an anger management issue, and that issue then bleeds over into work or their marriage. So it's the type of stress that kind of starts to impact relationships or work. It results in stress within those areas. Good, that makes sense? Okay. All right, so what is the biology of stress? Like we've talked about it, but what actually happens in your body when you have a stress reaction, okay? So how many of you guys remember high school biology and you learned about the fight or flight response, right? And the classic example is there's a bear in the woods and you see the bear and the bear sees you and you have to decide, are you going to flight? Are you going to try to outrun the bear? Are you going to fight the bear? Right. And now there's actually a third response that I don't remember learning about in high school biology, but it's called freeze. So you have fight, flight, or freeze, right? And in that moment, your body makes a snap decision and you figure out what you're going to do. And your body has a survival response, right? So what happens is your body dumps adrenaline, right? Your brain just whoosh, it just bathes everything in adrenaline so that you can have improved performance for a very short a period of time, right? And it's stories that we hear about, maybe like a parent lifting a car off of a child, like their child got trapped and they lift that car, and that is a fight or flight response. That adrenaline flowing into your body, and that cortisol flowing into your body enables you to be able to do that. All right. Stress can also trigger this response. Okay. And the problem is think about when we were all going through COVID, kind of at the height of COVID. I bet in May, like towards the end of May 2020, if we had all done a home test and tested our cortisol levels at home, everybody's cortisol level would have been raised. I know my cortisol level would have been raised. My children were at home doing school and I was working full time. My husband was working full time. I had a 5th grader at home trying to figure out what he's supposed to be doing. And every day that I had off was spent going through 5th grade curriculum, trying to figure out, did you do this? What are you supposed to do here? I don't understand. And he's like, I don't know, right? It was very stressful. I used to tell my husband, I can feel gray hairs just like spouting out of my head right now. I was very happy when June came. I was like, no more school, like so happy. But if I had tested my cortisol level, I guarantee you it would have been elevated. Right? And so stress can trigger that same response, the same response of our body to flood our system, to bathe our brain in cortisol. The problem is that if our brain stays bathed too long in cortisol, that's not good. It actually physically changes the brain. And so they've actually done studies on military veterans who experience PTSD. They've been in combat or something like that, and they have PTSD, and they've done imaging on the brain, and they found out that there have been changes in their brains. Their brains look different than a healthy brain, and it's because they were in situations where the level of cortisol that their brains were bathed in was extended for these long periods of time, and it actually changed the chemistry and the structure of the brain. Their brains look different, okay? And that's a problem. And what happens with people who have PTSD, especially like military veterans and things like that, is their brains tend to stay in this mode. They tend to kind of stay in this fight or flight mode. Their triggers are a little touchy compared to the rest of us. And so something small can happen and it will trigger, right? It will trigger that response when the response doesn't need to be triggered. And so their brains stay in this kind of like survival mode more than they should. And that results in what we typically refer to as PTSD or post-traumatic stress. And that's where the cortisol comes in, because then their brains stay bathed in that, okay? So then let's talk about acute stress versus PTSD, right? If I have an officer who experiences an officer-involved shooting, that's a critical incident, or maybe somebody is in a severe car accident, right? Or something along those lines. So something like that happens, it's a traumatic event. I expect that person to have a reaction to that, right? If they don't, that may concern me a little bit more, but I expect a reaction. I expect there to be nightmares, maybe appetite disruption, their sleep may be disruptive, they may have flashbacks, they may have intrusive thoughts, irritability, emotionality, a wide variety, right? They may not be thinking as clear, all of those kinds of things. I expect that. And that's one of the reasons why we go out and talk to officers, because officers are not always the most like mental health savvy individuals. And I want them to know, like, you may experience these things and you're not going crazy. Like, it's okay. You should experience these things. I expect you to, right? However, if somebody experiences them for more than about 30 days, maybe 45, sometimes we'll push it to 45, 30 to 45 days, you're probably looking at somebody who now meets criteria for PTSD, right? They have post-traumatic stress, because within that 30-day window or so, those acute stress symptoms should be lessening. They should be getting better. And if they're not, it means that we're probably looking at PTSD, right? And it doesn't always have to be a traumatic event per se for PTSD. You know, you can have people who develop PTSD being in kind of like a chronic stress situation. Maybe a child grew up in a domestic violence situation. They may never have experienced any violence towards them, but maybe they witnessed it, that sort of thing. They can have symptoms of PTSD from that and those kinds of things. Okay, so the stress brain loop. Okay, how does stress impact your brain? So you can see here that if you have chronic stress, whether it's inadequate sleep, poor nutrition, emotional distress, whatever it is, that's going to increase. I can never say this word. I actually had to like sound it out in my notes. The glucocorticoids, which is a class of steroid hormones in your brain, right? And that causes cellular changes in the hippocampus, which then makes the regulation of cortisol much harder in the brain. The brain doesn't regulate the cortisol as well. And you get into this loop, and then what does it result in? Decreased attention, decreased perception, decreased short-term memory, decreased learning ability, decreased word finding. Why is it important for us as mental health professionals to know about this information? Well, let's say I have a child brought in for therapy and they're really struggling in school, and everybody's saying attention deficit. Everyone's telling me, teachers are saying attention deficit. This kid's got attention deficit. But in actuality, they're living in a situation where there's chronic stress, high chronic stress. Maybe they're living in an abusive home situation or a highly conflictual home situation. Maybe they live in kind of chronic poverty and their basic needs are not always being met. What happens? Decreased attention, decreased short-term memory. They're not learning as well. They're forgetful. But they sure do look ADHD, right? Then you run the risk, if somebody isn't aware of maybe what could happen, you run the risk of the child being misdiagnosed, the treatment plan being incorrect, not being effective. Maybe they're mismedicated, right? They're inappropriately medicated. Now we have a child maybe on stimulants or something, and it's not working and they can't figure out why. And now maybe the kid's on 3 different medications because they're trying to figure out what's going on here, you know, that sort of thing. Rather than looking at maybe what might actually be going on in their brain, the stress of the situation, those kinds of things, what may actually be happening there. And so that's why I think it's important for us to know, how does stress impact the brain? Why is that important? All right, so how do we measure stress? We've already discussed it's hard to define it. And you know, since 1936, since Selye actually used the term stress, people have been trying to measure it, right? But how do we actually measure it? So this is just one of many scales that are used. It's called the Holmes-Rahe Life Stress Inventory. And basically what you do is, I only put a portion of it up here for you so that you guys could see it, so I could make it big enough. But it actually has 43 items on it, and they range in point totals from 100 down to 11 points. Okay. The number one stressor on here is death of a spouse. That gets an automatic 100 points. If you look, number 7, marriage, is 50 points. Okay. Ironically, I found this very ironic when I was looking through this scale. The 43rd item is minor violations of the law. It's only 11 points. I was like, okay, that's pretty subjective, because I think that would probably rank a little bit higher than 11 points for me if I was violating the law in some way. But change in work hours was 20 points. I was like, I don't know. I might switch those, but again, it's subjective. So who's to say that marriage is a 50-pointer for one couple versus another couple, right? That's what makes it difficult. So what you do is you look at the previous year. So if you guys were all taking this scale, you would look at from December 1st of 2020 through December 1st of 2021, how many of these items have you experienced? Then you would add up your points. You would say, okay, these are all my points. And if your point total is 150 points or less, you've had a relatively low amount of life change, and you have a low susceptibility to a stress-induced health breakdown. Sounds kind of scary, but that's literally what it says. Stress-induced health breakdown. If you score between 150 to 300 points, you have a 50% chance of a stress-induced health breakdown over the next 2 years. And if you score above 300 points, you raise your odds to 80% over the next 2 years. Now, do I think everybody who takes this inventory that scores over 300 points within 2 years, 80% chance they're going to have a stress-induced health breakdown? Probably not. Right? I actually use this scale in the class that I teach on psychology of policing. I use it. I give it to the cadets, and I always take it too. So they'll take it and I take it. I consistently run in the 200 range, consistently, but I've had some cadets like, I scored like 500 points, and I'm like, you might want to come see us. You may need some help managing your stress, So, but the problem with this is somebody could be at 175 points and not be doing well at all, versus somebody who's at 325 points and they're functioning just fine. Right? And that's a question that I get asked about a lot. Why is that? And the problem with these types of scales is they don't take into account individual differences. They don't take into account temperament. They don't take into account somebody's biology. Maybe I'm more prone, biologically, I have a little bit more susceptibility to anxiety than somebody else. They don't take into account somebody's mental health status. They don't take into account somebody's experiences. What have their individual experiences been? So the question I get asked a lot, how can that be? How can you have 2 children raised in the same high conflict house, and they've experienced the same level of chronic stress, and you have 2 very different outcomes? One child fares very well, they do fine. The other child doesn't. How can that be? Well, one of the answers is resilience. Okay. There's been a lot of research over the years on just that question that I asked. How can 2 people experience the exact same crisis and fare completely different? How does that happen? Resilience. Resilience plays a huge role in how well someone handles a crisis or how they handle stress. Resilience is generally defined as the ability to recover quickly from an illness, a change, a misfortune. Think about the property of a material that if you stretch a rubber band, if you stretch a material, the property of that material to be able to resume its original shape after you've stretched it and pulled it and bent it, that's resilience, right? So essentially for us, it's the ability one has to return quickly to their level of functioning following a crisis or high stress, and to do so efficiently and without a lot of damage. Okay, that's resilience. And the more resilient someone is, the better they handle stressors. Remember the scale we were just talking about? That's how somebody with 325 can function better than somebody with 175, because it's very likely that the person with 375 has greater resilience. They have better coping and they have greater resilience. Okay. And so for me, one of the main goals, anytime that I do therapy with somebody, one of my main goals is to help people build resilience. Even in children, I want to build resilience. I parent in such a way that I try to rebuild resilience in my kids, right? Because it's so protective. It's so protective. And that's why it's important to mental health. All right. So as a mental health professional, how do we help our clients build resilience? How do we help them build resilience, right? Can an individual build resilience without therapy, right? There may be a lot of people watching today who aren't in the mental health field and they're wondering, well, what can I do to build resilience, right? So I'm going to try to answer that question for both sets of people, all right? You can build resilience in a variety of pathways. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Today, I'm going to talk about 2 different pathways that I generally use in my therapy with people. And the first one is I want to improve somebody's self-efficacy. Okay. And self-efficacy is somebody's belief, like I have the belief that I have the capability to execute certain behaviors that are necessary to exercise some sort of influence over my life. Okay, that I have the capability to do that. So somebody with high self-efficacy tends to view problems as challenges rather than stressors. Maybe they view things to be mastered rather than endured or avoided. Okay, so think about maybe somebody training for the Olympics. They probably have a fairly high level of self-efficacy in regards to their sport. They have the belief that they have the capability to do what they need to do to reach this high level, to reach this goal that they have, right? Think about maybe a kiddo with math skills, right? If you have a kiddo who has high self-efficacy, they have the belief that I can practice math, I can practice these skills, and I can get better at math. Versus a kiddo who says, I'm just not a math person, like I'm not good at math. And they lack any kind of belief in their ability to actually improve their skill. You see the difference there? So that's somebody with high self-efficacy versus somebody with lower self-efficacy. So one approach that I use when I'm trying to help somebody build better self-efficacy, I'm trying to help somebody develop that, is I try to change one's thoughts about the situation. I try to change their perspective. Okay. And so one of the things, like let's take COVID, let's take quarantine, right? You could have the perspective of, I'm stuck in this house. I can't do anything. There's nothing I can do. This is horrible. And I'm stuck here. And so I'm just going to stress eat. I'm just going to sit on the couch. I'm going to watch Tiger King, and I'm going to stress eat, right? That's a low self-efficacy. Because you take that and you compare that to somebody who says, you know, I am stuck in this house, but what can I do about it? Maybe I could learn a new language while I'm stuck in the house. Maybe I could learn to paint. Maybe this gives me time to spend with my kiddos that I didn't have before. And we could find some new things to do. High self-efficacy, the belief that I have the capability to exert influence on this situation and make it better. Make sense? Yeah? Okay. All right. So that's the first pathway, self-efficacy. The second pathway is locus of control. Okay. Locus of control is the degree to which one believes that they, as opposed to external forces, but those are things beyond your control or influence, but the belief that they have control over the outcomes or events in their life. Okay, an internal locus of control, somebody with a good internal locus of control has the belief that I can control aspects of my life, that I can influence this, right? Somebody with an external locus of control sees that life is controlled by outside factors. I can't control that. It's fate, it's luck, it's chance. And I don't have any control over that, right? And so it is locus of control is different from self-efficacy. Okay. Self-efficacy is the belief that I can do something. It's the belief in doing something. I'm engaging in a behavior to change an outcome. Locus of control is the internal belief that I have control here. Like I have the ability to control the outcome here, right? I am in control. Things don't just happen to me. Okay. So if you take kind of that math example, remember the example we talked about before of, well, the person who says, well, I can study really hard and I can work really hard and I can improve my math skill versus I'm just not good at math, right? The math example for locus of control would be, I took a math test and I failed it. And if I have good internal locus of control, I say, well, maybe I didn't prepare well enough. I must not have studied hard enough. And so I didn't do well. I didn't control my world well enough to do well, right? Versus somebody with an external locus of control says, the teacher's bad, the test was poorly written, there was nothing I could do to change the outcome because the teacher's bad, they were horrible, it's the worst teacher I've ever had, and the test was poorly written, right? Do you see the difference between that internal and external locus of control? Okay. So again, self-efficacy is the belief that my behaviors are going to improve my performance in some way versus I can't do anything to get better. And then the locus of control is I can control the outcomes versus some external force is controlling me. So what I tend to find as a mental health professional is a lot of times when people come into my office and they're maybe experiencing like high levels of stress or anxiety, that a lot of times they have a stronger external locus of control than an internal locus of control. And they see their situation as anxiety is happening to me. Depression is trapping me. And so what I try to do there is I try to work with them. So if you go back to the slide where we talked about the biology of stress. So let's say I have somebody in my office who has panic attacks. One of the things that I try to do is I try to teach them about the biology of panic attacks. So basically what I tell them is a panic attack is when your fight or flight mechanism biologically gets activated when it shouldn't. So you're shopping an HEB and for whatever reason, your brain goes, there's a threat, and your fight or flight mechanism goes off. And now your heart is racing. You're having a hard time breathing. You're sweating profusely. You're having racing thoughts, and you have no idea why. So generally what happens if somebody's never had a panic attack before, generally what happens in that situation is the brain has to figure out why did fight or flight get activated? The brain has to make sense of it. And the brain goes, well, you must be dying. That's the problem. You're having a heart attack in HEB. And then what happens? That just raises anxiety. I'm having a heart attack. What does your brain do? Floods more cortisol and adrenaline into that system, and it just keeps it going, right? I had a parent one time, I was actually testing their child, and the parents were divorced. And so the dad had come in to give me his background, and he was a police officer. This is before I ever worked at HPD. And he told me that one time he was out fishing on his boat. He was just fishing, and he had an experience where he was like, I was sure I was having a heart attack. Like I could barely get the boat back to shore. I'm trying to call 911, like I'm having a heart attack. And he gets to the hospital and they tell him, it wasn't a heart attack, you were having a panic attack. Like, and he was like, I had a what? And they were like, a panic attack. And the doctor said, I can put you on some medicine so that doesn't happen again. He's like, give me that medicine right now. And he told me in session, he said, I'll stay on that medicine till the day I die. He said, because I never want to experience that ever again. Right now, is that completely realistic or that it's always going to control it? No, and things like that. But it scared him. He was very scared of it. So what I try to do is I try to educate somebody about like, this is what's happening when you have a panic attack. So that the next time they have a panic attack, they can go, oh man, this is what Dr. Snyder was talking about. This is that fight or flight. I don't have to freak out. This is exactly what's happening. And I tell them it takes about 45 minutes. The adrenaline will burn off. I got about 45 minutes. The adrenaline will burn off. My breathing will go back to normal. I'll be good. So what have I tried to do in that moment? I've tried to, number one, build self-efficacy. I have the skills to handle this. And number two, I've tried to shift their locus of control from an external locus of, I just have to endure this. I don't know what's happening. This is just happening to me, to I can exert influence over this to make it better. This isn't something that I just have to endure. Does that make sense? Yeah. So what we want to do is we want to take that idea of like, this is making me anxious, or this is stressing me. This is something that's happening to me, versus I have the tools to better manage my anxious thoughts. I have the tools to better manage my stress. I have the tools to do something about this. Building self-efficacy, shifting locus of control. So here's a fun little exercise that you can do. If you're a mental health professional, or even if you're not, you can do this just on your own, okay? So basically you kind of take a piece of paper, you do a big circle, okay? This is one for COVID. And basically it's what are you able to control and what are you not able to control? So under the things it says, I cannot control if others follow the rules of social distancing. I can't control what other people do. The amount of toilet paper at the store, I can't control that. I can't control shipping problems right now at Christmas time. I can't control that. I can't control how long it's going to last. I can't control how other people react. I can't predict what's going to happen. And I can't control, again, the actions of other people. So in this situation, in this pandemic, in this quarantine, what can I control, right? I can focus on these things. My attitude. I can turn off the news because we kind of get overwhelmed by all of that. I can find fun things to do at the house. I can limit my social media. I can figure out for myself what I'm comfortable with social distancing. What am I going to do? I can extend kindness and grace to people. I figure out how am I going to follow the CDC? What am I going to do about those recommendations? You know, I can make sure I wash my hands. You know, I wear my mask. But you can't control other people. And so it helps people figure out, okay, so what can I focus on? What are the things that I can do? Shifts the locus of control, builds self-efficacy. All right. All right. Sorry, I was reading that little thing. I was like, what does that say? Okay, so what are some strategies to build resilience and these things? Well, the first one is mindfulness. Okay, so what is mindfulness? We hear that word a lot too. It's become kind of a buzzword as well, right? But it's the practice of kind of purposely bringing one's attention into the present moment, right? It's the basic ability to kind of be fully aware of where I'm at, be fully present, what am I doing, and not be overly reactive or overwhelmed by what's going on around you, okay? So one strategy that I work with clients a lot, I teach clients to do this a lot, I teach kids to do this, and they can do it, and nobody ever even knows that they're doing it because you can just do it all in your head, right? But it's a grounding exercise that uses your 5 senses, and I'll just go through it real quick, because I know a lot of mental health professionals probably do use this exercise, but for people who maybe aren't, I'll go through it just really quickly for them. So basically, if you're having high stress, your thoughts are spinning, spiraling out, you're having a hard time kind of getting control of that, you just stop for a minute and you say, okay, in this room right now, what are 5 things that I can see? And so if I was doing that, I'd say, okay, I see the laptop, I can see the microphone, I can see my glasses, because I wasn't sure if I was gonna be able to see today. I can see the clicker, and I could see these batteries. What are 4 things that I could feel right now? I can feel the podium, I can feel my hair, I can feel my sweater, and I can feel the paper. What are 3 things that I can hear right now? I can hear the air, I can hear something whirring kind of over here, and I kind of hear my echo a little bit, right? What are 2 things that I could smell right now? I can smell my perfume, and I can just kind of smell the air, you know, how the room smells. What is 1 thing that I could taste right now? Well, I was chewing mint gum earlier, I can taste that, right? And do you see how in doing that exercise, it slowed me down, it slowed my thinking down, and it got me very focused on what is happening right here, right now, right? And it allows somebody then the opportunity to go, okay, let me just calm down. I got this, right? Whew, okay, so that's one strategy. Another strategy that I do is I teach tactical breathing. A lot of times people do not know how to breathe when they are stressed or anxious, and they tend to do what I call Lamaze breathing, and they go, and that's what they think is deep breathing. And all you're doing is hyperventilating and telling your brain to dump more adrenaline into the system, right? Just flood more cortisol because she really can't breathe. So I teach what's called tactical breathing. And tactical breathing is, I tell people you breathe through your nose, okay? And when you breathe in through your nose, I like to tell people to count in your head. So count to 4. So you'd breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4. And then at the top of that breath, I tell people to say the word pause in their head. And then when you breathe out through your mouth. And you count 1, 2, 3, 4. So it would be in 1, 2, 3, 4, pause, out 1, 2, 3, 4. If I'm in a place where, like if I'm sitting in a chair and I'm breathing, like maybe I'm at the doctor's office and I'm anxious about something, I have some stress, a physical issue. When I breathe out, I make my body heavy. I relax my body, right? I tell people do this in bed before you go to sleep. You're laying there and you're stressed and you're thinking about things and you can't clear your mind, and just focus on your breathing. So you count in, you pause, and when you count out, when you breathe out, you let your body sink into the mattress. It gets heavier and heavier, and eventually, boom, you're out, right? So that's tactical breathing. Again, you can do it. Nobody even needs to know right now. Y'all don't even know I did that, right? I mean, you do, but if I was doing it and you had no idea, you wouldn't even know, right? And so it allows people to take tools with them and control that in those environments, right? And so those are some ways that you can practice mindfulness in the moment and start to shift that locus of control and that self-efficacy. Gratefulness. So one of the things that I talk with people a lot about with depression is I tell people all the time, the opposite of depression is not happiness. I hear people tell me that all the time. I just want to be happy. I just want to be happy. And I tell them all the time, but the opposite of depression is not happiness. The majority of people do not walk around life every day like, I'm just happy, joy, joy, it's a great day, happy, happy. The majority of people don't walk around that way. The majority of us walk around like, I'm good. I'm pretty good. Like I'm okay, right? If we walked around in this state of happiness all the time, it would actually cease to be an emotional state. It would become our normal state, and there would be no differentiation, right? So the opposite of depression is not happiness. The opposite of depression is actually gratefulness. Being able to look at your life from a surplus viewpoint versus a deficit viewpoint. To actually look at your life and say, there are good things in my life. There are things that I can be grateful for. There may be a lot of stuff going on around me that's not great, but there are some good stuff going on. There is some good stuff here, right? And so it's about shifting that perception. It's about shifting that mindset. You're not chasing happiness. Because I feel like a lot of times for my clients who struggle with depression, they're chasing happiness, and you're not going to reach it every day, all day long, right? But you can chase gratefulness. You can get to a place where you go, there's surplus here versus deficit. There are good things. I have a gratefulness exercise that I do with people a lot. It's about, you kind of keep a gratefulness journal, but I'll tell them, especially for some of my clients who really struggle with depression, and I just know that they don't have the energy to do a lot, I'll tell them, look, once a day, just write down 1 or 2 things that you're grateful for. 1 or 2 things. You can put it in your phone. You can write it on a piece of paper, whatever works for you. The trick is, because most people can go, I can write down, I'm grateful for my health and I'm grateful for my family, or I'm grateful for my job, or I'm grateful for this, right? The trick to my little exercise is, but you can't repeat, right? So if you are grateful for your health and your family on day 1, you can't be grateful for your health or your family on day 2. You cannot repeat. Now, that really forces people to really drill down and be very specific about what they're grateful for in their life. So I'll tell them, like, if I'm grateful for my husband, if I say, I'm grateful for my husband today, tomorrow, I can't be grateful for my husband. If I want to be grateful for my husband, I have to be much more specific. So I have to say, like, I'm grateful for my husband because he's hilarious and he makes me laugh. That I can do, but I can't be grateful for that again. So if my husband comes up on the list again, I have to have a different quality. I have to have something else that I'm grateful for, right? And I've had clients do this where they're like, so this week, Dr. Snyder, I was grateful for garlic rolls. And I was like, fabulous. Garlic rolls are great, And they're like, because I couldn't, like, you wouldn't let me repeat. And so I had to come up with something else. I'm like, exactly. You had to come up with something else. You had to broaden to where you're like, man, I'm grateful for electricity. I'm grateful I live where I have running water. I'm grateful that I have, like back in February, a lot of us grateful that I have heat in my house because a lot of people did not. Right. So finding those things, drilling it down, narrowing it down. Knowledge is power, just like what I was talking about earlier with the panic attack, educating people about what is happening, right? Talking to them about it, being knowledgeable about your struggles, know what your triggers are, right? Be knowledgeable about what's going on with you, okay? And then the last one is let it go, just like we talked about on that last with the circle. What are the things you can control? What are the things that you cannot? And if you can't control it, you have to let it go. Because if you spend 4 hours worrying about toilet paper at the grocery store, you can't do anything about that. That 4 hours would be much better served in some other endeavor, right? Okay, I'm watching my time because I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Okay, so what are some unhealthy coping strategies? Stress eating. I know that happened a lot over COVID. Like a lot of people gained weight. We were eating like, I'll just sit here and eat some chips. One of my favorite shows to watch is My 600-Pound Life. Do any of y'all watch that? I love that show. But it stresses me out. Like I watch it and I'm like, oh, and I will find myself like eating chips while I'm watching that show. And I'm like, so ironic, like stress eating, very unhealthy while I'm watching a show about people who are chronically eat unhealthy, right? Alcohol, substance abuse. You don't want to use that as coping, right? It's something that we preach at the police department all the time because alcoholism is actually at higher rates among police officers and among the general population. Don't use it to cope, right? Don't withdraw from people. If you have supports around you, do not withdraw. Do not say, I can do this on my own. I don't need any help. Or stop spending time with your family, those kinds of things, or you just stop going to church if you go to church and that's a source of support for you, right? Be very careful about engaging in risk-taking behaviors, right? The rate of divorce among police officers is sky high because the rate of infidelity among police officers is sky high, okay? Risk-taking behaviors. I'm stressed. I'm at this extra job. It's my third extra job this week, and I'm working at a bar, and a female comes up and is being nice to me, and down the rabbit hole we go, right? Lots of officers own motorcycles. They, there's risk-taking behaviors because in the moment it feels good. It kind of feels like, oh, it relieved my stress, but it really didn't because now you have to work 7 extra jobs to pay for all your toys, right? So you're really causing more problems. And then avoid making major decisions. If you have an event or a crisis that comes along, try not to make any major decisions in the midst of that because you may be making decisions that are reactionary versus actually well thought out, well planned, good decisions, right? Like, you know what, I'm just going to quit my job. Or you know what, I just need to get divorced. We just need to get divorced. This isn't working anymore. When it's really not so much maybe the marriage that's the problem, it's what's going on around you or what you've been experiencing, that sort of thing. Okay. And then the last slide is positive coping. What are some things you can do, right? Try to eat well, right? I'm not the best at that. I do tend to be a little bit of a fast food junkie, but eat well. When your brain is stressed, it needs to be well fed. Higher protein, good fats, those kinds of things. Try to cut back on caffeine. Caffeine just stimulates the brain, and sometimes it can just make stress worse. or unhealthy kind of comfort foods, you know, the ice creams, chips, the macaroni and cheese. All of that sounds really good, right? I haven't eaten yet today, so I think I'm kind of hungry. Make sure that you're resting enough. Try to get enough sleep. You know, when we bring children home from the hospital, one of the first things that the pediatrician tells us to do is to set up a sleep routine. Get the baby on a routine, you know, that sort of thing. But for some reason, we as adults don't feel like we need to do that. But it's actually one of the best ways to build a good, like healthy sleep life is to have a routine, do things at night that are kind of like the same routine that triggers your brain like, oh, it's getting time to rest. Like that's what we do with babies. It's the same thing. Train your brain to go to sleep. Go to bed around the same time every night. Get up around the same time every morning. You know, find a sleep routine that works that will help you have better sleep. Physical activity. Research shows that exercise can be as effective as antidepressant medications. Do you guys know that during COVID, there was actually a shortage of Zoloft because the number of antidepressant prescriptions skyrocketed during COVID, and they were actually like having shortages of medications because people were so stressed. So physical activity can be, now you actually have to do it on a regular basis and for a good amount of time. You can't just like be like, I ran around the block once, this should be as good as Prozac. That's not how it works, okay? Like it actually has to be regular and of a duration, okay? Seek support, find support, family, friends. If you go to church can be a great source of support. Seek professional support if needed. It's okay to do that. It's okay to get some help. Spirituality, there's been research on prayer that those who have a spiritual belief, whatever it is, when you have a broader purpose or a broader meaning, you tend to fare better. You tend to have better resilience. You feel like you have a source of support that you can go to. Find purpose in life. Find some meaning. Volunteer. Do something outside of yourself. Find that purpose. Spend time in nature. Research has shown that when you get outside and you actually let the sun shine on you and you get a little vitamin D and you walk barefoot through your grass and things like that, that it lifts your mood. It's like, right? It's beneficial. Now, I know in August in Houston, that's not always possible because it's super hot, but do as much as you can. And then prioritize your time and your task. Okay. Like I talked about earlier, if you're spending hours upon hours thinking about or worrying about those things that you can't control, you have to figure out how to better prioritize your time, how to prioritize what you're spending your time on, how to prioritize what you're getting done. So work on prioritizing your task and your time, because that's often that's a stressor that you really do have control over. That's something that you really can effectively work on and change and make it better for yourself.